The crack of a rifle shot echoed across the barren landscape as Wade Grayson lowered his weapon, watching the deer fall in the distance. 3 weeks without seeing another soul had taken its toll. But the isolation was exactly what he'd sought when he purchased this remote ranch 10 miles outside of Virginia City, Nevada, in 1873. The Civil War had stolen too much from him: his youth, his faith in humanity, and most painfully, his ability to sleep through the night without the screams of dying men invading his dreams. Wade slung the rifle over his shoulder and trudged through the knee-high grass toward his kill. The late September air carried a hint of the coming winter, though the sun still beat down mercilessly during midday. His ranch sprawled across 200 acres of decent grazing land, with a creek cutting through the eastern portion, not the finest spread in Nevada territory, but it was his, paid for with the blood and sweat of 6 years driving cattle from Texas to the railheads in Kansas. By the time Wade returned to his cabin with the dressed deer, the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. His cabin stood as a testament to his own handiwork: solid logs chinked with mud and straw, a stone chimney he'd built himself, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It wasn't fancy, but it served him well, just as the solitude served his wounded soul. After hanging the deer meat in his smokehouse, Wade pumped water into a basin and washed the blood from his hands. The ritual reminded him of other times, other blood, and he pushed the memories away with practiced determination. Inside, he stoked the fire, added a pot of coffee, and settled into his lone chair, a book of poetry open on his lap, a small indulgence from his former life. The knock startled him so thoroughly that the book fell to the floor with a thud. For a moment, Wade sat frozen, wondering if he'd imagined it. Nobody came this far out, not unless they were lost or desperate. The knock came again, weaker this time, almost hesitant. Wade's hand instinctively found his Colt revolver as he approached the door. "Who's there?" he called, voice rough from disuse. "Please," came a woman's voice, trembling with what sounded like exhaustion. "Please help us." "Us?" Wade hesitated, then unbolted the door, opening it slowly, his gun partially concealed behind his thigh. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. A young woman, perhaps 23 or 24, stood swaying on his porch, her dress torn and filthy, her face streaked with dust and tears. But what caught his attention most was the small bundle clutched to her chest, a baby, barely visible beneath a tattered blanket. "Thank God," she whispered, then collapsed forward. Wade moved without thinking, holstering his weapon and catching her before she hit the floor. The infant gave a startled cry as he guided the woman to his chair by the fire. Her skin felt clammy despite the warmth of the evening, and her cheekbones protruded sharply beneath her pale skin. "Miss, can you hear me?" Wade asked, his voice gentler than he'd heard it sound in years. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes of the deepest blue. "My baby," she murmured, tightening her grip on the infant. "You're both safe here," Wade assured her, though the words felt strange on his tongue. Safety wasn't something he'd promised anyone in a very long time. "Water," she whispered. Wade fetched a cup from his modest kitchen and filled it from the water bucket. He helped her drink, supporting her head with one hand while she sipped greedily. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "I'm Nora Daniels. This is my son, Samuel." "Wade Grayson," he replied, uncertainty coloring his voice. "How did you end up out here? The nearest town is—" "I know how far it is," Nora interrupted, strength returning to her voice. "Our wagon broke down 3 miles back. My husband—" Her voice caught, and her eyes filled with tears. "Jacob was shot 2 days ago. Bandits. They took everything but left us alive, though I don't know why. The wheel broke, and I couldn't fix it. I saw smoke from your chimney and hoped." Wade nodded, understanding dawning. You need food and rest. I've got stew from yesterday and I just killed a deer. There's plenty. As he moved to the stove, Wade's mind raced. A woman and child in his home upended everything about the solitary existence he'd built. Yet he couldn't turn them out. Not with night falling, and who knew what dangers lurking in the darkness. Nora ate slowly but steadily, the color gradually returning to her face. The baby, Samuel, had awakened fully now, and Wade watched in fascination as Nora fed him from a small bottle she'd carried in a pouch at her waist. "He's 8 months old," she said, noticing Wade's gaze. "Born in January during the worst snowstorm Texas had seen in years." "You've come a long way," Wade observed, taking a seat on a wooden stool across from her. "We were heading to California. Jacob heard there was good farmland in the Sacramento Valley. Said we could start fresh there." Her voice broke again. "Now I don't know what I'll do." "You'll stay here tonight," Wade said firmly. "Tomorrow I'll ride to your wagon, see what can be salvaged. Then I can take you to Virginia City. Sheriff Thompson's a decent man. He'll help you get to California." Nora looked around the sparse cabin, her eyes settling on the single bed in the corner. "I don't want to put you out." "You're not," Wade assured her. "I'll sleep by the fire. I've slept in worse places." That night, as Nora and Samuel slept in his bed, Wade sat by the dying embers of the fire, his mind more alive than it had been in years. The woman's presence had filled his cabin with something he hadn't realized was missing: humanity, connection, the soft sounds of others breathing. It unsettled him deeply, yet he couldn't deny the pull of it. At dawn, Wade rose silently, left food and water within Nora's reach, and rode out to find her wagon. 3 miles to the south, he discovered it. One wheel completely shattered. The contents had been thoroughly ransacked, but Wade managed to recover a small trunk containing what appeared to be personal items and clothing. He lashed it to his horse and turned back toward the cabin. When he returned, he found Nora sitting on his porch, Samuel cradled in her arms. She'd washed her face and combed her hair, which fell in honey-colored waves past her shoulders. Something tightened in Wade's chest at the sight. "You found it," she said, rising as he approached. "Was there anything left?" Wade dismounted and untied the trunk. "This was all I could salvage. The wheel's beyond repair." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. There was a grave, fresh dug. Tears welled in Nora's eyes. "I couldn't leave him unburied. I used my hands to dig. It wasn't deep enough, but it was all I could manage with Samuel to care for." Wade nodded, understanding the terrible choice she'd faced. "I'll ride back and make it proper, if you'd like." Gratitude flooded her face. "You'd do that for a stranger?" "It's what any decent man would do," Wade replied, though he knew that wasn't strictly true. Decency had become a rare commodity in the territories. The next day, Wade returned to Jacob Daniels' grave. He dug it deeper, constructed a cross from branches, and spoke the only prayer he could remember from his childhood as he stood over the mound of earth. He wasn't sure if the words meant anything anymore, but they seemed appropriate for a man who'd died trying to give his family a better life. When he returned to the cabin, he found Nora outside, hanging freshly washed clothes on a line he hadn't used in months. She'd swept his porch and somehow made his rough cabin seem more like a home than it had since he built it 3 years ago. "I hope you don't mind," she said, noticing his expression. "I needed to feel useful." "It's fine," Wade replied, dismounting. He stood awkwardly for a moment, then said, "I fixed up your husband's grave," said a few words over him. Nora's hands stilled on the wet fabric. "Thank you. Jacob was a good man. He didn't deserve to die that way." "Few do," Wade agreed, memories of his own crowding in. That evening, as they sat by the fire after Samuel had fallen asleep, Nora asked Wade about himself. At first, his answers came reluctantly, in short bursts that revealed little. But as the night deepened and the flames cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, Wade found himself speaking of things he hadn't shared with anyone. He told her of growing up in Missouri, of joining the Confederate Army at 18 because that's what men from his town did, of the horrors he'd witnessed at Shiloh and Antietam. He spoke of his disillusionment, his wandering afterward, his work as a cowhand and then trail boss, and finally, his decision to stake a claim in Nevada, far from the memories and the people who might recognize the haunted look in his eyes. "And you've been alone all this time?" Nora asked softly. "By choice," Wade confirmed. "It's simpler." Nora gazed at the sleeping infant. "I understand the appeal of simplicity, but there's a hollowness to it, isn't there? A silence that grows until it's all you hear." Wade didn't answer, but the truth of her words resonated within him. 3 days passed, and Wade didn't mention taking Nora and Samuel to Virginia City. Each morning, he told himself he would suggest it by evening, and each evening, he found a reason to delay. Nora had settled into a routine, cooking meals from his stores, caring for Samuel, and adding small touches to his cabin that transformed it from a mere shelter to something approaching a home. On the 4th day, Samuel developed a fever. The infant's face flushed red, and his cries turned weak and plaintive. Nora paced the cabin floor, her face etched with worry as she tried every remedy she knew. "He needs a doctor," Wade said late that night, as Samuel's breathing grew labored. "Virginia City is too far," Nora said, despair edging into her voice. "He won't make it that far. Not like this." Wade thought for a moment. "There's a Paiute woman, lives about an hour's ride from here. Name's Morning Dove. She knows healing better than any doctor I've met. I'll take you to her." Without waiting for an answer, Wade saddled his horse and helped Nora mount with Samuel secured tightly against her chest. He swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to steady her as they rode through the moonlit landscape. Morning Dove's small cabin nestled against a hillside, surrounded by carefully tended herb gardens. Despite the late hour, she answered Wade's knock promptly, her weathered face showing no surprise at their arrival. "The child is sick," she said, her English clear but accented. "Bring him inside." For the next several hours, Morning Dove worked over Samuel, brewing teas, applying poultices, and chanting softly in her native tongue. Nora watched with anxious eyes while Wade kept a respectful distance, acutely aware of how much this woman's skills had helped him in the past when a rattlesnake had found his ankle 2 summers ago. By dawn, Samuel's fever had broken. The infant slept peacefully in Nora's arms as Morning Dove finally sat back, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. "He will live," she said simply, "but he must stay warm and drink the tea I will give you for 3 more days." Relief washed over Nora's face. "How can I ever thank you?" Morning Dove's dark eyes studied her closely. "By living well? By teaching this boy to respect all people, no matter their skin or ways." Her gaze shifted to Wade. "You have found a family at last, Wade Grayson." Wade opened his mouth to correct her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply nodded and offered the older woman the coins he'd brought, which she accepted with dignified grace. The ride back to Wade's cabin was quiet, with Nora dozing against his chest, Samuel secure in her arms. Wade found himself acutely aware of the weight of her body against his, the scent of her hair, the way her breathing had synchronized with his own. It frightened him how quickly she had breached the walls he'd built around his life. That night, after settling Nora and Samuel in his bed once more, Wade stood on his porch, staring at the star-filled sky. He needed to take them to Virginia City soon. Nora needed to continue her journey to California, to build the life her husband had envisioned for them. It was the right thing to do. Yet the thought of returning to his solitary existence after they left hollowed out something inside him that he hadn't realized had begun to fill. The next morning, he awoke to find Nora already up, cooking breakfast over the fire. Samuel lay on a blanket nearby, cooing softly at a wooden horse Wade had carved years ago and never quite understood why he'd kept. "I've been thinking," Nora said without preamble, "about what happens next." Wade steeled himself for the inevitable. "I can take you to Virginia City whenever you're ready. There's a stage that runs to Sacramento 3 times a week." Nora turned from the stove, her blue eyes direct and clear. "Is that what you want, Wade? For us to leave?" The question caught him off guard. "It's not about what I want. You have plans. A future in California." "Plans change," Nora said quietly. "When Jacob died, everything changed. I don't know anyone in California. I don't have enough money to start a farm on my own." She took a deep breath. "But here Samuel has already gotten stronger. Here. I've felt safe for the first time since we left Texas." Wade's heart hammered against his ribs. "What are you saying, Nora?" "I'm saying that perhaps we could help each other. I've seen how this place has come alive with someone to cook and clean and care for it properly. And you've been alone too long, Wade Grayson. It's not good for a man to be so solitary." "You barely know me," Wade protested, even as something warm and unfamiliar spread through his chest. "I know enough," Nora replied. "I know you took in strangers without hesitation. I know you buried my husband and said words over him when you didn't have to. I know you rode through the night to save my son." Her voice softened. "And I know the way you look at Samuel when you think I'm not watching, like he's a miracle you never expected to see." Wade swallowed hard, unable to deny the truth in her words. It wouldn't be proper, a woman and man living together unmarried. A smile touched Nora's lips. "Then marry me, Wade. Not now, not tomorrow, but when we've had time to know each other better. We can say I'm your widowed sister for now, if anyone asks, but give us a chance to build something here. Something good." Wade looked at her standing in his cabin, backlit by the morning sun streaming through the window, and realized he'd never seen anything more beautiful in his life. The thought of her leaving suddenly seemed unbearable. "What about California?" he asked, one last defense against the hope rising within him. "California will still be there if this doesn't work," Nora said pragmatically. "But I think it will. I think we found each other for a reason. Wade." As winter settled over the Nevada landscape, Wade's cabin underwent a transformation. Curtains appeared at the windows, sewn from fabric Nora had salvaged from her trunk. A second chair materialized beside the fire, crafted by Wade's hands during the long evenings. A cradle for Samuel stood in the corner, lovingly carved with scenes of horses running across open plains. The first snow came in early November, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Wade stood on the porch, watching Nora show Samuel the falling flakes, the infant's eyes wide with wonder. The sight sent a surge of protectiveness through Wade that was both foreign and entirely natural. "He's never seen snow before," Nora explained, catching Wade's gaze. "Last winter in Texas, I kept him bundled inside during the storms." "He'll see plenty of it here," Wade replied. "Nevada winters can be harsh, but beautiful too." That evening, as they sat before the fire, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Wade gathered his courage and reached for Nora's hand. Her fingers twined with his naturally, as if they'd been doing this simple act of intimacy for years rather than for the first time. "I'm going to Virginia City tomorrow," Wade said quietly. "We need supplies for winter and—" He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I thought I might speak to Pastor Miller while I'm there." Nora's eyes widened slightly. "About? About whether he might be willing to ride out here? Or if we should come to town? For a wedding?" Wade's voice grew firmer with each word. "That is, if you haven't changed your mind." Nora's face softened into a smile that made Wade's heart skip. "I haven't changed my mind, Wade Grayson. Not one bit." The trip to Virginia City the next day felt different from any Wade had made before. The town's dusty streets and weathered buildings no longer represented an unwelcome intrusion into his solitude, but rather a connection to a world he now had reason to engage with again. At the general store, he purchased flour, sugar, coffee, and fabric for new clothes for all of them. He bought toys for Samuel, a wedding band for Nora, and seeds for a garden she'd expressed interest in planting come spring. People noticed the change in him, the lack of the habitual scowl, the way he actually responded to greetings rather than merely nodding curtly. Sheriff Thompson stopped him outside the mercantile. "Heard you've got company out at your place, Grayson. Widow and a baby?" Wade tensed slightly. "News travels fast." "Small town," Thompson replied with a shrug. "Just wanted to make sure everything's all right. Not like you to take in strays." "They're not strays," Wade said firmly. "They're family. Or will be soon. I'm speaking to Pastor Miller this afternoon about performing a wedding." Thompson's eyebrows shot up, but his weathered face creased into a genuine smile. "Well now, that is news. Congratulations, Grayson. About time someone thawed that frozen heart of yours." Pastor Miller agreed to ride out to the ranch the following Sunday. Wade returned home with his purchases and the news, finding Nora in the garden plot behind the cabin, Samuel wrapped warmly against her back as she turned the soil for spring planting. "Sunday," she repeated when he told her, a blush coloring her cheeks. "That's rather soon." Wade suddenly worried he'd presumed too much. "We can wait longer if you'd prefer. There's no rush." Nora's gaze met his, steady and sure. "No, Sunday is perfect. I was just thinking I don't have anything suitable to wear for a wedding." Wade grinned and held up the package containing the fabric he'd purchased. "I thought of that. The shopkeeper's wife helped me choose. Said it would bring out the blue in your eyes." Nora set down her garden tool and approached him, taking the package with one hand while the other found its way to his cheek. "You're a surprising man, Wade Grayson." Before he could respond, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in their first kiss. It was gentle and brief, but it sealed something between them that Wade knew would never be broken. The Sunday wedding was simple but profound. Pastor Miller rode out as promised, along with Sheriff Thompson and his wife, who insisted on coming when they heard the news. Mourning Dove arrived bearing gifts of medicinal herbs and a hand-woven blanket. Wade had invited her specifically, feeling it appropriate that the woman who had saved Samuel's life should witness this new beginning. Nora wore a dress of deep blue calico, sewn hastily but with care over the preceding days. Wade had shaved and donned his one good shirt, feeling oddly nervous as he waited for the simple ceremony to begin. When Nora walked toward him, Samuel in her arms, Wade felt a certainty settle over him like a mantle. This woman and child who had appeared on his doorstep in desperation had brought with them something he'd thought forever lost to him: hope, purpose, and the capacity for joy. The vows were traditional, but spoken with conviction. When Pastor Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Nora with a tenderness that belied the strength of his feelings, acutely aware of Samuel between them, the child who would now, legally and in every other way that mattered, be his son. After their guests departed, promising to visit in spring when the roads were clearer, Wade, Nora, and Samuel stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold. "Are you happy, Mrs. Grayson?" Wade asked, still marveling at the change in his circumstances. Nora leaned against him, Samuel now asleep against her shoulder. "Happier than I ever expected to be again," she admitted. "When Jacob died, I thought my chance at happiness died with him. I was just trying to survive for Samuel's sake." She looked up at Wade, her eyes reflecting the sunset. "I never imagined I'd find love again, especially not at the doorstep of a solitary rancher in Nevada." "I never imagined loving anyone," Wade confessed. "The war took something from me, made me believe I was better off alone." his arm tightened around her shoulders. "You proved me wrong, Nora. You and Samuel both." The months passed, turning into years. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Wade expanded the cabin, adding rooms as their family grew. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them 2 years after their marriage, followed by twin boys, William and James, 2 years later. Virginia City grew and changed as the Comstock Lode brought wealth and settlers to the region, but Wade and Nora's ranch remained a haven of peace and purposeful work. They endured droughts and blizzards, times of plenty and scarcity, always facing challenges together. Samuel grew into a strong, thoughtful young man who called Wade Pa without reservation. He had no memory of the journey that had brought him to the ranch or of the father who had died trying to reach California. But Wade and Nora kept Jacob's memory alive through stories and a carefully preserved photograph that held a place of honor in their home. On their 10th anniversary, Wade took Nora to the highest point on their property, where the view stretched for miles in every direction. The land below them teemed with cattle, horses, and the evidence of their successful life together. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked as they sat side by side, watching the sunset. "Staying here instead of continuing to California?" Nora took his hand, her fingers still fitting perfectly between his despite the years of hard work that had changed them both. "Not for a single moment," she replied. "This is where I was meant to be, where we were meant to be." Wade nodded, understanding completely. The loneliness that had once defined him now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the rich tapestry of family life, with all its complications and rewards. Later that night, with their children asleep and the ranch quiet around them, Wade held Nora close in their bed, marveling at the journey that had brought them together. From a desperate knock on his door during a lonely evening to this full, vibrant life they'd built together, it was more than he had ever dared to hope for. And everything he now knew he'd always needed. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Nora murmured, already half asleep against his chest. "For finding me," Wade replied, "for changing everything." Nora's arms tightened around him in silent understanding, and together they drifted into sleep, secure in the knowledge that some journeys, though they begin in sorrow and desperation, can lead to the greatest happiness of all.